Today on the pod, we got Ved Rasic. Ved is a serial entrepreneur. We go through the highs of selling your first software as a service business, the lows of identifying when things aren't necessarily working out and it's time to ditch the idea, to the highs again and of identifying a new opportunity as Ved has done with his new company, Lead Delta. And hopefully you can take some takeaways when you're starting to build your next software as a service platform. So enjoy my conversation with Ved Rasic.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ved, appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Where are you coming from, and how are things going on your end today?
Where I'm coming from is a difficult question to answer, but where I am right now, I'm in Ottawa, Canada.
I figured I'd open that up as to a way to interpret how you're doing, how things are going. So I came across you years ago with a product called Lead Delta that I use. It's a add-on to help facilitate my networking within LinkedIn, and we'll talk some more about that a little bit later on. But can you kind of give us a little bit of your origin story of how you've got to where you are right now?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of useful to talk how I got into tech. Well, even since the university days, way back when, like I started like doing a little bit, digital work, like Facebook ads just started coming out, Google ads and all that. So I basically started helping traditional businesses, traditional consulting businesses, management businesses to actually become digital, to transition. And that was pretty cool. Like, I got to hire a few of my friends. We would build websites, blogs, organize their events, live events, and, run ads and things like that. So that was my intro into tech. And, I distinctly remember when I was in Austria, in Europe, I had a really good job. I was spearheading an organization with like 100 plus people. And I was very lucky to be in that position. And so, I would negotiate like with Cisco Systems, GM, like Samsung, like, really big names.
Big companies, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Like, super young dude, like in a suit, like and all that, like, yeah. But anyways, they liked me, and I had a really good offer for them. So it was all good. But I remember distinctly a bank that would start their accelerator program for startups would offer a job for me to basically, work with startups and select startups for funding and this and that. And I was like, how the hell am I going to do that? I've never done it before. I never started a startup. Like, it's not a thing I would do. And so, but it was also very clear to me that one day I'd want to have my own product. And, I have no background, like no, rich mom and dad, like, I had to do everything myself. So it was hard to just jump right into it and start a product. And again, working for a bank like wasn't really like it was an easy choice for me. But I said no. I went the B option, and the B option was to start a software shop with a few other guys in Belgrade, Serbia. And this is how we started. To start that, you just have to trade your time, find business, and find engineers to fulfill the needs, and that's it. Like that's the business model. So it's the easiest thing to start, right? And yeah, I did that for a couple of years. We were very successful, got some governmental contracts in the US, worked with some larger businesses, larger startups. That was great. But after 4 years, I was like, now is the time, I have some money. Now is time to build my own products, which, brings me to Canada. The first startup was a marketplace startup for vehicle owners and repair shops. Okay. It was a beautifully designed app. Well, actually 4 apps in one. Uber drivers loved it. It was all over Toronto. It was amazing, but shops wouldn't pay for it. And that's where the business model was. And so 8 months in, after a very long, tedious development process where we developed the best possible app, which is still relevant today, actually we didn't have enough paying users and we had to shut it down, which was the first big lesson for me. Thankfully, I didn't invest as much as sweat equity, but it was the first lesson. So ever since then, I really blamed myself too hard for that, because I was like, you got one shot, like you know how it goes.
It's right? It's my baby.
Exactly.
We're gonna make it. We're gonna make it.
Yeah, we're gonna make it. And then a few years back, you look at like, oh man, like so inexperienced, right? But you learn a lesson, right? And that's the lesson I implemented later on with Lead Delta. But before Lead Delta, one of my friends, he started a company called Autoklose, and then later on, the 3 of us co-founders joined, and that was a success. We bootstrapped the business. It was a proper split of responsibilities, fully bootstrapped email automation service competing with Outreach, Yesware.
I found out I had an account for that. actually.
Yeah, seriously?
You must have did an AppSumo for that back in the day, possibly.
Back in the day, possibly.
I saw that this morning. I was like, hold
That's
up.
awesome.
I have an Autoklose account.
That's
and
a
it
great
still
product.
works.
It still works. It's a great product. We got acquired in like 2020. So that was completely bootstrapped. We got acquired, spent a year there in a new company, basically leading marketing for both brands, VanillaSoft and Autoklose. And that's when I figured out the kind of new way where the industry is headed. And I was like, I want to test this model. So I acquired a couple of startups, tiny code bases basically to kind of start something new. And one of those things became Lee Delta. So that's a kind of short genesis.
And there's a lot to unpack there. So I'm kind of curious, going back before we get into the current stuff, when you were talking about you being a co-founder and some of that other experience, were you actually like a software programmer, or when you were in those co-founder roles, were you more of the business facing side, chasing down some of those other opportunities or helping with user experiences or things of that nature? What was kind of the predefined role in there?
100%. So basically, how I think of startups, you either build or you sell. And so I was on the sales side mostly. But the thing is, somebody also has to, unless you have engineers that have been in the space, worked in the space, somebody also needs to prioritize for them what to work on next and prioritize that roadmap. So that used to be like, anywhere between like customer experience, sales, and the product. That was the kind of Venn diagram, the intersection of, where my skill set was at the time. Official title was CRO, but honestly, sure. In startups, like if you care about a title, you shouldn't be in a startup. Yeah, right.
It should just be person A, person B, person C.
like literally. That's right.
So if you were getting success with the Autoklose platform, what prompted you to go, hey, now's the time to sell and exit this? Was it a good enough payday, or was it like, maybe this is as far as we can take this particular product, and we've got some other ideas we kind of want to work on?
Oh, thank you for a great intro. Like, it's all of these things combined. And I can speak for myself. For me personally, it was, I think Warren Buffett said that, like, how I got rich is like taking some chips off the table early on in the game, right? Like, and that's, I think there's plenty of problems in the world. There's plenty of ideas. And as long as we have humans, like, we'll have problems to solve. So as an entrepreneur, I keep calling myself like a software entrepreneur, but honestly, like, as I evolve as a creator as well, I kind of figure out, like, it doesn't matter what you're building. Like, you're solving problems. That's the definition of an entrepreneur. Doesn't matter how small or big it is, right? And so for me, that was that. It was an opportunity to do something else as well, right? And it was a great opportunity, great company. To be perfectly honest, at the time, I wasn't even thinking like, oh, I'm going to build this next thing. I had ideas, like million ideas, but I was really focused on growing the company that acquired us. Like, that was my number one thing. Okay. And interestingly enough, 6 months in, like, things changed for me, and I was like, I'm definitely not good, like, in 200-300 people companies. Like, I gotta do
the itch started.
Exactly, the itch started. I announced that like 6 months before my contract, so everybody got was ready and all that. I think pretty fair proposition. But then I also saw, like, this is what I like to talk about, because there's three types of people, right? As a founder of LinkedIn says, right? There's like, Navy SEALs, who just, break the barriers, win the island, etc. Then you have an army to tear down the walls, and then you have police to keep peace. And there's no right or wrong. Like, you just need to figure out, like, how do you win the game? Are you number one? Type A personality, type B, type C, right? And so I figured out, some of my guys, they weren't contractually bound to a new company, but like, you can see that they're, in a way unhappy, and they have that itch. Have better salary, better terms and conditions, like in a new place, like better contracts, all that. But they're still unhappy, and I'm like, holy, cow! Like, these guys are type A, right? And so they want to build something else, and so all these pieces came together. Interestingly enough, a year or two later, VanillaSoft, it got acquired by a PE fund. That's all obviously public information. So they also did well for themselves. So, like, overall, the whole thing was a success, in my honest opinion, and I think we made the right move.
No, that's awesome. So as your contract's up, you've made it known that you're ready to leave Autoklose and VanillaSoft. Yeah. What was the spark
for Lead Delta? What was that idea how did you go through a testing phase process where you went, we may have something here?
Right. So first it was a thesis, and the thesis was even before, right after Autoklose, so like 2018 maybe, something like that. I literally have a slides document which says like ideas are worth nothing. That's the name of the slide. and then it's me like ranting about like CRMs and how cumbersome they are, how there's too great of a cost both for the producer or the company and the end user. So when I'll use Salesforce, a great company by all accounts, great software and all that, right? But when you really look at Salesforce, extremely complex. It's a beast on the engineer side. And I actually have insider information. Like I know people who led, engineering teams, like executive vice presidents. I know people who led AI at Salesforce, etc. So it's a beast, right? Like it's hard to comprehend even how difficult the platform is. Now on the other end, the users also have their share of costs on Salesforce. Like in order for you to acquire Salesforce, to implement it, you need to what? Like invest $100,000 in a consultant to actually set some things up. And this is just the beginning, right?
Right.
So, and how's that called? Like there's a theory in software engineering that has that theory that as software develops, like the cost becomes so great that somebody needs to bear it. Like somebody needs to take care of that cost.
Gotcha.
And in Salesforce's case, like it's a proper split between the company and the end user. So I was like, something has to give. Like AI started being developed, and I knew, even though I'm not an engineer, I worked with engineers for 10 years. Like I knew that like this architecture is not good. And it's not good to be AI first. It's not meant to be AI first. And for them to redo it, much like with LinkedIn, like for them to redo the whole damn thing, like it's like
Right.
next to impossible. Like no board will sign that proposition. And so it's an opportunity, right? So okay, so that's one side. The second side to it, like I was like, CRMs are comprised of relationships and people, and so why don't we lead with that? Like, why do I have to buy a CRM and then it comes in empty when I have 10, 20, 30 years of experience in relationships and people I went to school with, people I had been to the same company with, etc. And so I was like, okay, so how do I tackle that problem? And, I was like, well, LinkedIn seems to be a place to be. And I immediately said, like, we're not going to do any automation. We're not going to do any auto messaging, auto requests, but we want to just facilitate the relationships and provide a bit better interface. That's enough for me to be a proof of concept to see if this is going to roll. Never plan to fundraise for it. Never plan to do anything. And that was the start. I mean, there's a whole bunch to unpack and to dig deeper, but like that's basically the initial story.
When you go through that initial spec process, and we talk about you're developing that MVP or validating the idea, even before you build an MVP, what did you do to validate that idea ahead of time before going, man, we're going to, whether it's sweat equity or you're hitting up your buddies to come actually, build an MVP or a minimum viable product. How do you validate that idea first, or did you go, let's see what happens?
Well, yeah, great question. So I validated by talking to a whole bunch of industry experts. So I have that deck built out, like nothing fancy, just ideas on a blank Google slide. That's it. And so I started talking to people who are relevant, who could be potential users from various different industries. And everybody is like, oh yeah, I wish I can have that, right? The whole idea is like signals instead of data. Like, why do I care what your email is? Like, I don't care about your email. I care to reach out to you for you to answer, right? Like, and so, I mean, yeah, but then you need to find an email. And I'm like, fine, but like also like you need to find the right signal. When is the right time to get in touch with you? Like, what are your objectives? The whole thing should reduce spam in the industry. And my assessment is that there's enough information on the web about all of us, pretty much, in our companies, organizations, etc., so that you don't have to spam a single person, right? Like you can literally matchmake, companies and people, right?
I laugh because of the spam that I get through LinkedIn that actually is trying to sell me the thing that I do, which is the ones that make me laugh, or the certificate. Hey, you need this certification. Dude, I've got this certification for 14 years. What are you talking about? Anyway.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for reaching out. No, it's more like delete.
No, it's difficult out there, right? Like on both sides, and there are no bad players, right? Like in both yours and my case, it's the same, right? Like sometimes we are the guy, like, bugging somebody else trying to reach out, and you don't feel comfortable doing that. So all of that made me think like, it's the right time. And then I talked to a lot of people, and everybody's like, yeah, I need that, right? When I say a lot, like I probably talked to like 50 people like from the industry. And this is like, I have a benefit of a network. So like I started with my own network. So that's one of the benefits we offer with Lead Delta. And so, yeah, so how did we go about the first product? Well, luckily enough, like I found a project that fits the bill that I paid, a couple of $1,000 for. And I just acquired a project that was like a back-end, infrastructure. Well, not even back-end infrastructure. It's just like a tiny code set that, we could potentially use for something. And I was like, let's just build on top of that and launch it in a month. And that's what we did so in 30 days, I had a landing page I was driving my traffic to, and, people started signing up. The whole copy was around CEOs and, people who are power networkers and whatnot. Honestly, this was the first time in my career where people actually reacted to a copywriting like this. They were converting, I don't know the rate, but I just saw like some really big names, and I was like, holy cow, this makes sense, right? And so that was the second point. The third point, when we released it, people started testing, writing messages, adding to a roadmap that was public from day one. And I was like, we have something here. So I hired a few people full time, invested more money in, and basically we rebuilt the platform so that the initial code was just useful because it propelled us to launch within a month.
So with that, what you had purchased, you already had kind of a rudimentary thing to base it off of. You weren't sitting there. Nobody on your team was standing at a blank page going, all right, what's the first line of code going to be?
John, you see, like this is like, I'm not sure if anybody would understand, but what you just said is so important. Because how do you even call that? Like I think zero start or whatever. Like so when you have like blank sheet of paper, as a writer, as a developer, it's kind of hard to start. When you give people like this is how the tech works. Like let's try build around it. Like launch as soon as possible. It's much easier, right? Like and that's what we did. And people keep getting the wrong part of it. Like people like when I say this, and I'm just gonna keep saying this publicly because it's the fact. But like people are like, oh, so the whole thing is built off of some code base. I'm like, dude, no. Like we have, too many hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Like this code is insignificant, but it was super significant in the beginning. So like and people keep getting the wrong end of the message. But
yeah. When I write, it's like don't stare at the blank page. Just put an outline. What's kind of some bullet points? Then start filling. Then you just fill it in. You fill it in and change it. Right. When did you know that you had enough of something to actually release to start charging for?
Oh, that's a great question. So now we go back to my first experience with the company, with the marketplace, right? Where we spent $300,000, like time, money, like all that into nothing. I was like, it has to go out. A month in, we start charging. And quite honestly, like it was super rudimentary. Like we would just provide a better interface for your connections. You can put notes, tags, that's it. We started charging, I think $10 a month. And the first person to have signed was Chief Information Officer back then at Visa, and now S&P 500 Global. And I was like,
wow.
And I was like, and the email is some like whatever 123 at gmail.com, and I'm like, yeah, it's some spammer like wants to just rip us off. And then I go and check his LinkedIn, and I'm like, wow. So
I'm assuming you reached out and said, so what do you think?
Yes. Now that's a great story too. So then we're like, do we raise for this? I'm like, it's too early. Like, by the way, like I have a grandiose vision, truly like big vision. And I'm like, I talk about it because like, if I don't manage to execute, someone else will. Who cares, right? Like, but what we had like was like a tiny project, right? And so I wasn't willing to kind of fundraise and endure that. I just wanted to build and sell. Like that was the whole thing. And we were like, maybe it's the right time to go to AppSumo, just collect a whole bunch of users and get feedback and whatnot. And that's what we did. So I reached out to AppSumo, like thinking, we're friends. Like I already made a ton of money, and they said, no, like it's too basic for right now. Like we just increased our standards like this. I'm like, what? And I'm like, can at least something be easy, right, for me, because I have experience in this, and the answer is no. You just have to endure. And so what I did, I found their principal affiliate that sells like the most on Facebook, and I was like, dude, let's make a deal before AppSumo. I'll give you a better deal for your users. Or your community. You do it for like a month, and then we see. And he's like, perfect, let's do it. I never did this before. Let's do it. And we launch in a Facebook group, like it's a huge success. And I record like a minute video of Stripe purchases, and I send that to AppSumo folks, and I'm like, guys, you think it's too early? And they're like, sure, let's launch it. And we launched it like, I don't even know when. And so for 3 months, we made, a nice chunk of change.
Was that 0 to 300K in the 3-month time period? Was that?
That's it. That's basically
okay.
It. Yeah, that's basically
I'm glad that tied in, because you hit a couple things I want to ask. So I am a collector of software startups from AppSumo. I have a document of lists of software that I've tried. Some are great. Some are out of, they don't exist anymore, and some have completely changed what they do, and what I bought it as, they don't do that anymore.
Right. Fair enough.
Actually, been getting emails. That's fine. I know what I'm getting into.
Yeah.
But for anybody not familiar with AppSumo, I've had the opportunity to have lunch with Noah. I met him at an event in Boston. It was totally random. I'm like, hey, what's up, man? And I helped him with his book launch that just came out, $1 Million
That's
Weekend.
awesome.
I helped out with chapter 2, if anybody cares.
There you go. That's awesome.
But, yeah, so good time. But for anybody not familiar with, if they're looking to build their own software, what is AppSumo, and how much did you make? Because those are lifetime deals.
Right. Yeah. So it's very simple in a way, right? Like, so it's a marketplace where, people, buy and sell. And so in this particular marketplace, it's pretty much all about software. So software companies would list their listings for like a month, 2 or 3 early in their life cycle. 99% of the cases, like they just started basically much like us. And it's a bargain. Like as an end user, you can come in and purchase these tools for like $50 forever, lifetime, for as long as they're in the business. Like however you want to translate that. So the whole premise is like you support the builder, the producer, and you also get to keep the software, which I would say like 2 or 3 times out of 10 will be something that's useful over like many years. And so one thing I think I would like to reflect on is a theory behind it, and in my honest opinion, when you build a software or pretty much any digital product, like you have your early adopters, and those early adopters, it's very interesting. They might be billionaires, and I have some billionaires like who bought Lee Delta on the lifetime deal, and
that was not me.
I was thinking, okay, so minus one.
Yeah, minus. Yeah, scratch. I'm sorry to disappoint. Hold on. I can say not yet.
Not yet. Exactly. So listen, I and what I'm trying to say is like, these folks, they like to invest time, and they like to do it just for kicks, because it doesn't matter. Their attribute is that they're early adopters, and they like to be the first among their friends to spot a new technology, a new trend, etc. And so you'll find them at Product Hunt, you'll find them at AppSumo. It doesn't matter, like they can be from Brazil, US, Serbia, India, Japan. Like, doesn't really matter. They come from all geolocations. They come from all, and so this is an important thing for people who are trying to build their software to have in mind. And so, okay, so and why would you go to AppSumo, and why wouldn't you? Well, if your software does not have costs that increase with usage and over time, it probably pays for you to launch an AppSumo and get that early traction. Because what we're talking about going from 300 users, friends and family, to like 10,000 users or 5,000 users, right? Which is, which can be huge for most businesses, especially if you don't have a good distribution yourself. So let's say you're just starting out and you're building like technology, and you don't have Twitter followers, you don't have LinkedIn connections, like you don't have digitally much of distribution that you can lean on. It's useful. Why it's not useful? Well, some AppSumo guys tend to be difficult, on your support, because again, they don't like to spend money, but they like to spend time. I mean, listen, I buy a lot on AppSumo, right? So I'm also talking about myself. If I really like some technology, I'll spend time, I'll give feedback, etc. And even if I don't need it, I'll sometimes purchase it to support, etc. So very, very different attributes, right? Yeah, done that. Been there, done that. But very different attributes. So anyways, that's who we're dealing with. But again, very useful. You collect reviews, you collect a whole bunch of traffic. Google notices that. And in our case, we were on a Chrome Web Store initially, and still are. In 2 or 3 months from now, we're going to have a standalone web app and go away from that. However, we're still there reaping the benefits. We're top 3 when it comes to LinkedIn tech. We're top 3 when it comes to CRMs. We are by far the number 1 CRM on Chrome Web Store. And Chrome picks it up when they see there's a ton of usage, when they see there's a ton of ongoing usage and active users. Obviously they bump up your listing. And so all of these things are pro AppSumo, and shout out to Noah and the AppSumo team.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I assumed it was a big deal for building that roadmap out for those things that you're going, okay, now you're starting to do pattern recognition. Yeah. Man, 90% of people are saying we really need to do this.
Exactly.
Or something or their inverse. Man, we thought this was important and nobody actually gives a crap, type of thing. So why are we going to waste energy on that?
Yeah.
This is kind of where it needs to go.
Now that's interesting. Now that's very interesting. I wholeheartedly agree. We did have also different ways of handling that in-house, because what people ask us to do is just build more automation. And if you remember the beginning of a chat, we were like, that's not what we want to do. This is just a proof of concept for us, right? To go to the next stage, going from scooter to motor to SUV to a truck, completely rebuilding the product and the back end and everything every few years so we can get closer to our vision. And so, again, users would want to have a faster horse, improving on things that already exist. And we're building things that don't even exist. They don't even touch the imagination of a user right now. And so anyways, so that's a little bit kind of contrarian thinking, but it really helped us a lot to really stay on our path. And honestly, we left a lot of dollars on the table, but we weren't interested in that pathway, for better or worse. It's still yet to be seen.
I want to circle back to this I got a larger development question on the back end of this, but what exactly can you, I guess, succinctly describe the problem that Lead Delta helps solve, how you're solving it currently, and what then you're trying to transition to down the road, as much as you're willing to disclose, of course, because I know some people like to keep things under wraps until specific times.
100%. Well, listen, two things right now. So right now, Lead Delta is basically a productivity layer on top of LinkedIn. So it gives you a better overview of your connections. With our external database, we allow you to basically, almost for free, but baked in the price, unlock the data of certain first, second degree kind of data connections. Now, the second thing is inbox. So you get a whole bunch more things to do with our inbox. There's more real estate on the screen. You can pin, you can tag, you can leave notes, you can leave tasks and reminders for yourself. And those information that follows you wherever you go, right? Whatever you are on LinkedIn or whatever, it follows you. So that's kind of the individual use case. Now the team use case is very interesting. So we started getting companies from 2 to 25 people, and also some publicly traded companies, 2 to be exact, who actually wanted to flip their CRM script from deals to relationships. So they want to bring their entire network in one spot. So we can see, who is the best person we know at Google, right? And so this is where our further development will go more into kind of B2C to B type of relationship. So we're selling more into companies now. Yeah.
So just to make sure I understood that right. So if you're aggregating all of those connections, so that way you're not just limited to maybe the salesperson, the CEO, the COO, where you've got, hey, Tommy in the mailroom over there, that's, the admin assistant. Man, he's got, his uncle works for, something like that brings them into that conversation.
Yeah, and use cases 100%. And use cases are, for example, one of the principal use cases we keep having is like a CEO would send their principal assistant and like 2 or 3 people who just like, they're not managing their LinkedIn profiles. Like, come on, like, let's just be real. So what happens there is like, yeah. So what happens there is like sometimes, CEO might know a person and they just want to get foot in the door. And honestly, like more and more people are starting to sell like that. We're seeing those patterns. So basically what we want to do is like bring the entire team. So exactly what you said, we might know that somebody else's uncle works at the next company. Can you make an intro? If not an intro, can you give us more information about the company, etc.? Like it's way more powerful because, and then there's a greater deal of privacy and all that goes in it. So we're very specific on what's a personal information, and you have to have the right to disclose or not to disclose it, because let's be honest, like in 100 plus people companies, like people get poked all the time, like sometimes they might be pondering like jump shipping, like and all that, so you don't want your boss to see that. So there's a lot of thought, like a lot of thinking that went into it, and a lot of testing on the market. So we're very slow in particular to develop that side of the business, but it's slowly but surely picking up, and it's important.
No, and I've got like a cool thing and then kind of a downside, because I have a downside thing happen to me a few years ago. Okay. Cool thing is, I think this allows everybody to kind of understand, get a seat at the table in a sense. Oh, yeah. It's more than just that day-to-day job. Everybody gets that opportunity to potentially contribute to the growth of the company that they're in, particularly if they're invested in what it is. The downside, and this is something that I had experienced, was you potentially getting quantified by the relationships that you have or don't have. Because I had a situation a few years ago where it was sitting there going, I was unsure about the environment, and then people could see who, maybe I was connected to or who I knew. And it's like, why don't you do this? And I'm like, and I was kind of like, I don't know right yet. I don't have the warm and fuzzies with this. And then getting that kind of pushed into that kind of like getting seen as the value of the network that you had in some of those institutions.
Interesting.
So I see it absolutely being that benefit, because not just for the company but that person that may be trying to elevate themselves, like this is a way that they can do that and do it in not in a sleazy way or something along that line.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, listen, like now that's very interesting, and we'll see if the tech can solve this. I took note of this, but it's what we're trying to do. Like, if you think about any new modern software, like you can collaborate, like you can do things, in conjunction. Like, and when you look at CRMs, like you have to refresh, you have to like it's an imperfect flow of information, and plus you're measured by like spam, basically. Like if you look at leading indicators, like it's primarily like how much did you send, right? In most businesses, right?
They're trying to do the numbers game.
Numbers game. It's a numbers game. So that's what we're trying to solve. I think that's pretty valuable. I'm not moving away from SaaS for next little while until we fix that problem. And so like we keep improving the team, we keep improving the technology, and we're slowly marching towards vision. That's pretty much it.
Do you have any just general philosophies around? We're in this environment where pretty much everything is a rental ship, as it were. Nobody owns anything anymore. And of course, for a business, having a software as a service, predictable revenue streams, you can sit there and identify what's your churn rate. You get different points to sit there and try to improve upon things. But the other side, for the end user, you're just constantly paying for stuff. Right. I mean, I'm old enough where I would buy a license of Microsoft Office that would come on floppy disks that were like 50 deep, but I owned it. And of course, you weren't necessarily getting pushed out. That was early stages of the internet. I'm dating myself now, of course. Things of that nature. But do you see the market space just continuing to double down on software as a service and subscription models versus maybe I'm licensing version 1 that doesn't include version 2, and you can have version 1 forever?
Right. I could market's going to be a market. Like and I know my friend, he started developing a software like super cheap, like for large companies. Like if you want to do it in the cloud, like it's like whatever, you pay $100 and I don't care if you have 1 million employees or like one, right? Like so that was his business model. So he managed to acquire a whole bunch of users, and he was selling into enterprise companies on-prem, exactly what you're saying. Like basically buy your own version and will charge the hell out of it, but you can do that, and it was very popular with banks, with large institutions and whatnot. So nothing wrong about that. Now I also know like 37 Signals folks, like, which I admire a lot, like in how they build the companies. Like they're now starting like campfireones.com, etc. Like, listen, it's cool as long as you can justify that, because you have to justify it. Like if you can't do it, and there's always going to be a but, right? Like yes, you own version 1. But like 1 year from now, version 1 is worth nothing. So yay, you own version 1. Good for you, right? Because like that's how I think about it. So on the other end, like yes, if you want to buy version 1 and you want to develop your own thing on top of it, fine. Like I'm okay with that too. But then you have to pay ongoing subscription costs to your people to maintain and it's pros and cons, right? Like you'll still have to pay. Like it's either you pay my people or you pay your people, like whatever you prefer, right? Like that's. Yeah,
I look at this as tech's always, it's got that circle of life, that life cycle thing. So my first thing back in the day was I worked on a Unisys mainframe, so everything was a dumb terminal. So imagine just essentially your green and white screen back then, or green and black screen back then, and it functioned it functioned as the cloud for the company. Nobody had a computing device. Then you get to distributed networks, individual computing devices. Oh, guess what? Now we've spun back around. We've got the cloud, except the mainframe, using that term, is just stuck in somebody else's warehouse doing the computing power for that stuff. So I kept wondering if some of this stuff, when it comes to the business model, is going to swing back around to me buying Windows 2000 one time and running it for 6 years, type of situation.
No, I think the problem is, what I think a lot of people are thinking, and rightfully so, they're saying, well, there's Google, there's Amazon, there's Microsoft, and that's about it, right? Like you don't have any other player. Like it's almost like a monopoly or oligarchy, or however you want to call it, right? But listen, the cool thing about capitalism, and especially in the States, like, at one point you get regulated, and we all like want to be small and want to keep our like tiny businesses and then like have massive impact. Like, that's pretty much the mantra of, well, I wouldn't say 37 Signals, but like, small team moving mountains kind of type of thing, right? Is how I would phrase it. But then eventually you might become so big that you have to get regulated. Like, what happened with Rockefeller and like, all the giants of that era. They all had to get regulated at one point. So you get a whole bunch of smaller companies, and then you get the innovation back up. Okay. So it's a beautiful cycle.
That is a great transition into how I want to kind of, as we're getting into the end in the time here, of what's going on like with Apple and those things. When you're building that software product that is so dependent on one other provider. Apple just recently got the federal lawsuit. They've got that ecosystem set up that they get 30% off the top. I heard a great podcast with Scott Galloway, Professor Scott Galloway.
I knew you were going to say that.
Did you hear the one?
Of course, I do. Yeah.
Because
it's beautiful.
It was great because he talked about, he goes, they're essentially acting like Visa and MasterCard who take 2 or 3%. Yeah. But Apple has got it in such a way because the tech, if you've ever watched a congressional hearing about tech, it's awful, and they have no clue what the hell they're talking about.
Right.
But he goes, but Apple is taking a 30% chunk of this, and they're dictating the rules to you.
Right.
So how do you view risk when it comes to building a software that is so reliant on another piece that change the rules at the whim? A great example of this, I think this was last year with Reddit. Obviously, they just had their IPO this week or last week, is recording this. Yeah. And, they so dramatically increased the price of their API. All of these developers that had better tools, if you go to the user base, they couldn't afford it anymore, and they had to shut down, which I think was in prelude into their going to their IPO. So they would eliminate all that stuff. But how do you view somebody going, I see an idea that there's an idea in the market space that needs to be solved, but it is so reliant on that third party not changing the rules mid-game. Or going, good idea. I'm going to change the rules. You can't do it anymore, but we got it.
Listen, so going back to Reddit for a sec, who started that first? Elon Musk and Twitter.
Oh, yes.
So they were like, pay 50 grand a month or 100 grand a month and you're good. Like you can do automation, you can do like scheduling posts, like do whatever you want. and everybody else get away from from Twitter, like f off to be mild. So and that's what happens. Like honestly, even me building Lead Delta on top of LinkedIn, like initially I was like, we want to be friends with LinkedIn, like I want to build a great product, like and we really, like, I have proof to just how do you say it, like to back this up, right? But at the end of the day, it's a beast of interests, right? Like lower level management, middle level, top level. It's just the mechanism. It's nothing personal, right? Like it's an organization comprised of systems, process, people, whatever, right? Like, and interests, and so ultimately, like, as long as they have an interest to keep us on, they will, and opposite the opposite, right? So that's how I think of it. Like it's very I think realistic in my case. The great thing when you're a young startup and you're building on top of something else, like you have an example of Facebook and Zynga, like you have many examples, and that one I think is successful because they managed to pivot. So a great benefit for you as a young founder starting is that you can lean onto these platforms, and you can get the scale distribution benefits, but you don't delude yourself that they're your friends and that you can build a perfect kind of friendship and everybody gets their piece of a cake. No, like the bigger the company is, the more they're trying to be protective of what they have. And that's it, like, and so you have to jump ship, like, and as I said, like, we use this as a proof of concept, and, and over the next 2 months, 3 months, we'll be completely off, or at least 99.9% off from the platform. So yeah, and I think if we do that, we execute it perfectly, and that can be used as an example, right? So.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate. I know you're going to have to jump here in just a couple of minutes. Where anybody want to reach out? Best way to reach out to you?
Yeah, definitely find me on Twitter. I started using Twitter a lot more. You can also find me an email, ved@leaddelta.com. So easy. If you guys want to shoot me a message, I typically respond within a week. Let's be realistic.
Sounds good. That's the
awesome, Jen. Beautiful.